You know how every suburban family in America tries to sell you the dream? White picket fence, the shiny SUV in the driveway, a dog that barks only when Amazon drops off a package, and a wife who looks like she just stepped out of a Pinterest board. That was me, or at least that's what the neighborhood thought. We were the couple that made people whisper, goals. What they didn't know was that my so-called perfect marriage was nothing more than a Netflix pilot for a dark comedy that no one asked for. I played the loyal husband character, working 9 to 5, coming home with the groceries, smiling like an idiot while my wife rehearsed her role as the loving partner. But if you looked closely enough, you'd see the cracks. Her phone that never left her hand, the fake laughter at my dad jokes, the sudden obsession with perfume she never wore for me. Still, I ignored it all because Americans are trained to protect the illusion of family at all costs. Betrayal, infidelity. That's something that happens to other people, the ones who make bad choices or marry too young. Not me. At least that's what I told myself every night as I stared at the ceiling fan, pretending my wife was just tired again. And then there was my boss, the guy everyone loved to hate, the kind of man who smelled like expensive cologne and midlife crisis. He'd slap me on the back in the office and say things like, "We're family here," which is corporate America's way of telling you that they'll own your soul for free pizza Fridays. He had a way of looking at people that made you feel like you owed him something, and apparently my wife decided to pay the debt with something other than money. If life were a conspiracy theory subreddit, this would have been the moment the pieces started clicking. The late-night texts, the business trips that suddenly required my boss and my wife to coordinate charity work. And me, the fool, nodding along like I was living in a Hallmark movie. But here's where the story gets twisted. The night I caught them wasn't just another sad tale of American infidelity. No, that night felt like stepping into a science fiction thriller directed by Quentin Tarantino on steroids. I walked in through the garage, holding a bag of Taco Bell, because nothing screams toxic love like fast food on a Wednesday night. The house was quiet, too quiet, the kind of quiet you only hear in horror films right before the killer pops out. I climbed the stairs, pushed open the bedroom door, and boom! There it was. My wife and my boss, tangled up like they were auditioning for some low-budget HBO series. My brain froze, but at the same time, it didn't. It split into two versions of me. One stood there in silence, the betrayed husband, heartbroken, humiliated. The other was narrating the whole scene like it was an absurd parody. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Cheating Olympics, where betrayal is the only medal worth winning. Instead of screaming, instead of demanding answers, I did something far more terrifying. I said nothing. That silence, it was louder than any gunshot. They didn't even notice me at first. My wife's eyes were closed, his hand on her back, and for a brief moment I thought, wow, this is what my marriage boiled down to, being upstaged in my own bed by the guy who signs my paychecks. When they finally realized I was standing there, I just smiled. Not the happy kind, but the creepy kind you see on a villain right before the revenge arc begins. I dropped the tacos on the nightstand, said, "Enjoy," and walked out. No confrontation, no fight, no dramatic American soap opera screaming match. Just silence. Because silence, when seasoned with betrayal, is the deadliest weapon of all. From that moment, everything changed. You know how in comic books, one bad day turns a normal man into a supervillain? That was me. I wasn't the husband anymore. I was the guy plotting revenge in a world fueled by cheating and toxic love. I started to see everything differently. The suburbs weren't a neighborhood. They were a stage for lies. My wife wasn't a partner. She was an actress in a B-rated infidelity drama. And my boss? He wasn't just a manager. He was the final boss in a twisted video game where betrayal was the only currency. They thought I was broken. that I'd crawl into a corner, cry about family values, and beg for therapy. But what they didn't know was that I was already scripting Act 2 of this absurd play, and in my script, I wasn't the victim. I was the executioner. The strangest thing about catching your wife in bed with your boss is not the screaming or the tears issues or the slamming doors like in every cheap daytime soap opera. It's the silence that comes afterward, the silence that moves in and takes over your house like a squatter who refuses to leave. Every chair, every hallway, every family photo suddenly whispering, betrayal, like it's the punchline to some cosmic joke, and yet I played along. I woke up the next morning and poured my coffee as if nothing had happened, kissed her cheek like a husband in a 1950s commercial, and went to work where the same boss shook my hand with the same cologne-soaked grin, the only difference being now every handshake felt like infidelity signed in ink. And I smiled because Americans are good at smiling through pain. We smile at barbecues, at school recitals, even at funerals. So why not smile when your marriage and career have fused into one giant toxic love triangle sitcom? But inside, the silence was burning me alive. I couldn't scream. I couldn't confess. So instead, my brain went full conspiracy theorist. Every moment felt orchestrated, as if the entire suburb had been designed by some higher power just to gaslight me. Maybe the HOA wasn't about lawn care after all. Maybe it was a secret council of cheating spouses covering for each other. Maybe the family cookouts were cover operations where the real topic was how to hide infidelity without losing custody of the dog. And maybe, just maybe, the local pastor was in on it too, baptizing babies with one hand and deleting texts with the other. I went to work pretending to be normal, but in my head I was writing chapters of a paranoid novel, the kind you'd find in the bargain bin at Walmart titled Toxic Love, The American Conspiracy, where betrayal wasn't an accident, it was policy, where bosses were trained at secret retreats on how to seduce employees' wives to keep morale down, and families were just experiments to test how long a man could endure cheating before he either snapped or turned into Batman without the cape. Every meeting with my boss felt like theater now. I'd nod as he talked about quarterly goals while imagining the subtitles flashing above his head. By the way, I slept with your wife. And yes, I'll probably do it again. And my wife? She became an actress rehearsing lines from the script of guilt, the sudden kindness, the extra plate of pancakes at breakfast, the fake laughter at my jokes again, all of it too polished, too rehearsed, the way an infidelity survivor can tell when someone is overcompensating. What no one tells you is that silence itself becomes revenge in slow motion. Because the cheaters, the betrayers, they start to wonder, they start to sweat, they start to look at you differently, waiting for the explosion that never comes, like criminals trapped in a haunted house. Every door creaking, every floorboard groaning, wondering if tonight's the night you light the match. And I relished that power. I became the ghost in my own family, haunting them with nothing but eye contact and smirks, making them choke on their eggs at breakfast. It wasn't just toxic love anymore. It was psychological warfare. Sometimes I'd fantasize about storming into the office, dropping a PowerPoint presentation labeled Cheating Statistics, One Boss at a Time, and clicking through slides of their betrayal, complete with background music from a soap opera. Other nights, I imagined myself on a late-night talk show, the betrayed husband turned anti-hero. The guy who found out the American dream was just a rerun of bad infidelity dramas, cracking jokes while the audience laughed and applauded my silence as if it were stand-up comedy. But the best fantasy, the one that kept me alive, was the revenge arc, the slow-burn plan that I carried like a secret weapon. Because revenge wasn't just about payback, it was about artistry, about timing, about making betrayal look like a rehearsal compared to the final act. So I waited, like every good American anti-hero, polishing my smile, mowing the lawn, waving at the neighbors, while inside I was cataloging every detail, every late-night phone call, every sudden work event, every time my wife avoided my eyes at dinner and I turned them into ammunition, stockpiling proof like a doomsday prepper hoarding canned beans. They thought they were safe because I was quiet, but silence is the biggest lie America ever sold. Silence is not weakness. Silence is strategy. And mine was building into something that would make every cheating spouse and every smug boss regret ever underestimating the man who walked out of the bedroom with tacos instead of tears. There's a funny thing about betrayal. Once you've swallowed the first dose of poison, you start to develop a taste for it, like cheap whiskey that burns going down but somehow keeps you warm. And in that warmth you find clarity, a strange clarity that whispers, revenge isn't just an option. It's the American way. Because let's face it, this country was built on payback, Boston Tea Party, revenge. The entire Marvel franchise, revenge in spandex. Even family barbecues devolve into revenge when Uncle Rick steals the last hot dog, so why should my cheating wife and her corporate sugar daddy of a boss be exempt from history's oldest hobby? But my revenge couldn't be messy. No, messy is for amateurs. Messy is for guys who scream in the driveway at midnight, and I wanted something operatic, cinematic, a parody of the American legal system mixed with a dash of Shakespearean tragedy. I pictured myself as a conductor, raising my baton while the orchestra of betrayal tuned their instruments, every lie, every cheating text message, every guilty glance adding another violin to the symphony. And when the music swelled, I'd drop the curtain on their perfect little toxic love affair. So I started collecting, not baseball cards or coins, but data, screenshots, receipts, subtle recordings slipped into family dinners, where I asked innocent questions that made my wife twitch. The betrayal was no longer abstract. It was cataloged, indexed, archived, like some twisted version of the Library of Congress. I became obsessed with the details. The perfume she only wore when she was volunteering, the sudden interest in yoga despite hating exercise, the way her phone tilted away from me at dinner like a guilty teenager guarding a diary. It was laughable. If infidelity had a user manual, she was reading it line by line. Meanwhile, at work, I smiled at my boss like the world's politest hitman, nodding at his pep talks while mentally drafting the press release that would announce his downfall. Every handshake became an inside joke. Every "we're a family here" speech another line in the comedy of errors he didn't know he was starring in. Sometimes I wondered if I was living inside a Truman Show spin-off, with cameras hiding in the ceiling fans, the neighbors cast as extras, the entire world waiting for the moment the quiet husband turned into the Avenger. And in those moments of paranoia, I didn't feel crazy. I felt chosen, as if the betrayal had baptized me into a secret brotherhood of men who knew that silence was just foreplay for revenge. The plan wasn't just legal, it was mythological. I imagined myself standing in front of a jury, not of 12 random Americans, but of every betrayed husband in history. George Washington nodding in approval, Julius Caesar patting my back, whispering, "Et tu, boss?" And the jury foreman slamming the gavel, declaring, "Guilty of cheating, guilty of betrayal, sentenced to eternal humiliation." My fantasies spiraled into parody. Daytime talk shows with me as the guest star, Oprah handing me tissues as the audience booed my wife, Dr. Phil asking my boss if cheating with an employee's spouse was really worth losing his pension. But underneath the humor, the sci-fi daydreams, the parody scenarios, the core was simple. I was building a bomb, not with dynamite, but with proof, silence, and patience. Every infidelity adds weight to the trigger. Every fake smile from her makes the fuse shorter. And soon enough, the detonation will echo louder than any screaming match ever could. The beauty of revenge isn't in the explosion, though. It's in the anticipation, the suspense that makes them sweat, the wondering of when and how the hammer will fall. That's where the true power lies, in being both the betrayed husband and the playwright of the final act. At night, I would lie in bed next to her, listening to her steady breathing, and I'd imagine announcing her betrayal over the neighborhood loudspeakers like it was a 4th of July parade. "Ladies and gentlemen, please rise for the national anthem of infidelity, featuring my wife and our dear boss on lead vocals." I'd imagine holographic billboards flashing her texts across Times Square, entire football stadiums chanting "Toxic Love," while she begged me to stop the show. And still I said nothing, because silence was the seasoning. Silence was what made revenge taste gourmet instead of fast food. They thought I was broken, but the truth was I'd never felt more alive. Betrayal had turned me into something sharper, funnier, darker, like a parody villain who knows the audience loves him more than the hero. And deep down, I knew Act 4 was coming, and when it did, it would not be subtle, it would not be merciful. It would be the grand unveiling of every secret they thought they'd buried. Revenge doesn't arrive with a drum roll, it sneaks in disguised as normal life, slipping through the cracks of everyday routine. And I wore my disguise well, the perfect husband, the obedient employee, the man mowing his lawn with a smile while secretly rehearsing an opera of betrayal inside his head. My wife thought I was healing, that maybe her cheating had been just another bump in the long highway of American family drama. And my boss, well, he thought I was too dependent on my paycheck to ever bite the hand that slept with my wife. That was their mistake. They forgot that silence doesn't mean surrender. Silence means the war has already begun. I started small, because all great revolutions start with whispers. At the office, I casually planted doubts, harmless jokes about corporate loyalty, little sarcastic nods that made people chuckle, but also made them wonder if the boss was hiding something. In America, you don't need hard evidence to ruin someone. All you need is a hint, a rumor repeated enough times until it becomes fact. Betrayal had turned me into a master of spin, and my boss, blinded by arrogance, didn't even see the cracks forming in his reputation. At home, I was even more surgical. Every evening felt like a stage play, and I was the director pulling invisible strings. I left subtle reminders around the house. A shirt I'd never worn but smelled faintly of perfume I borrowed from a department store. Text notifications from a mysterious M that popped up on my screen just loud enough for her to hear. Phone calls taken on the porch where I laughed too hard at jokes no one was telling. She was drowning in her own paranoia, and I didn't even need to lie. I just let her imagination do the cheating for me. It was delicious, watching the guilty try to guess if the betrayed was guilty too. That's the thing about toxic love. Once betrayal enters the house, no one can trust anyone, not even themselves. Meanwhile, my conspiracy theory brain upgraded from Reddit thread to full-blown sci-fi saga. I imagined myself as a covert operative, codename The Husband, infiltrating the twin empires of infidelity and corporate greed. My neighbors weren't just neighbors anymore. They were informants. The mailman wasn't just dropping envelopes, he was delivering intel. Even the dog seemed to sense the plot, staring at me as if waiting for the signal to attack. And the best part? None of it had to be real, because in this parody version of America, perception was reality. If she thought I was cheating, if he thought his empire was crumbling, then I had already won half the war without lifting a finger. But the real masterpiece was the evidence, my arsenal. Screenshots piled up like ammo, call logs cataloged like top-secret files, photos snapped from a distance like I was auditioning for a Netflix documentary about betrayal in the suburbs. I didn't just want proof, I wanted an art installation, a gallery of infidelity so damning that when I finally unveiled it, it would feel less like a divorce and more like a museum opening. And yet I wasn't in a rush, because revenge isn't microwavable. It's slow-cooked, the kind of dish you prepare over weeks, letting the flavors of humiliation and paranoia marinate until the guilty choke on every bite. Sometimes I caught her staring at me across the dinner table, eyes narrow, fork paused halfway to her mouth, as if she was trying to read the new language I'd started speaking without words. Sometimes I'd catch my boss mid-sentence, stuttering for no reason, looking at me like maybe I knew something, maybe I didn't. But either way, the silence was killing him faster than any accusation ever could. That's the beauty of betrayal. It doesn't have to be exposed to hurt. Sometimes just the threat of exposure is enough to turn confident cheaters into paranoid wrecks. In my head, I was already scripting the finale, the big reveal, the night when the curtain would fall and the toxic love triangle would collapse under the weight of its own absurdity. But until then, I kept smiling, kept showing up, kept playing the role they thought I was stuck in, because the longer they believed I was broken, the sweeter the revenge would taste when they realized I was the one writing the ending. They thought they were the predators, but in reality, they were the punchline. And me, I was the comedian holding back the joke until the timing was perfect, because in comedy and in revenge, timing is everything. Every great American story has its showdown, the gunfight at high noon, the courtroom climax, the moment where the hero finally drops the mask and the villain realizes the game is over. Mine didn't have bullets or cowboy hats, but it had something deadlier, PowerPoint. I had spent weeks crafting it, not just a folder of proof, but a cinematic presentation worthy of an Oscar, complete with dramatic pauses and transitions that could make Betrayal look like a Marvel villain origin story. And when the night came, I invited both of them, my wife and my boss, under the polite pretense of a family dinner. The table was set like a parody of suburban harmony, candles lit, wine glasses sparkling, roast chicken steaming in the middle. They arrived nervous, though pretending otherwise. The guilty always try too hard. My wife wore that dress she thought could erase the word cheating from her skin. My boss smelled like desperation disguised as cologne. I let them settle, let them sip wine, let them believe for one foolish moment that maybe the storm had passed. Then I clicked the remote. The TV screen lit up behind me, and suddenly our living room was a theater. Slide 1, a blurry photo of them together in the car outside his office, zoomed in like an FBI file. Slide 2, screenshots of text messages so cliché they could have been ripped from a teen soap opera. I can't stop thinking about you. He'll never know. This family thing doesn't matter. Slide 3. Call logs at 2 a.m., the hours when honest people are sleeping, but cheaters are busy writing their own horror stories. My wife gasped, my boss shifted in his seat, and I smiled, because revenge tastes best when served with Wi-Fi and a clicker. They stammered excuses, the usual infidelity playlist. It didn't mean anything. We were lost. You don't understand. Oh, I understood. Betrayal is universal. Toxic love follows the same script every time, and I had memorized their lines long before they spoke them. I cut them off with one word: enough. Silence fell heavy, thicker than any sermon, heavier than any accusation. They looked at me like school kids caught cheating on a test, waiting for detention, not realizing I'd already expelled them from my life. Then came Act 2. I slid the divorce papers across the table like a dealer tossing down aces. Her hands trembled, mascara already streaking down her cheeks as she begged, literally begged, whispering promises of change, of therapy, of starting fresh. It was almost comedic, a parody of redemption arcs, the guilty spouse pleading for one more season in the sitcom of family life. But the audience, that would be me, was done watching reruns. And my boss? His fall was even better. I handed him a neatly sealed envelope filled with copies of every message, every call, every photo, already addressed to HR, the board, and his wife. His face drained of color, his hands shaking like a bad actor fumbling for lines. He muttered threats at first, then bargains, then silence, because betrayal has no defense when the receipts are projected in HD. In that moment, he wasn't a powerful man anymore. He was just another headline waiting to happen. Executive's career implodes in cheating scandal. The room was thick with panic, but for me, it was liberation. I didn't need to shout, didn't need to throw plates or break glasses. The evidence was louder than any tantrum. They begged, they bargained, they whispered mercy like it was a coupon they could still redeem. And me? I just sat back, sipping wine, watching the toxic love triangle collapse in real time. Revenge wasn't the explosion I had fantasized about. It was quieter, darker, funnier. It was watching two people choke on the lies they thought they'd gotten away with, and realizing that silence had been my sharpest weapon all along. When it was over, when they sat slumped like deflated balloons at a failed birthday party, I stood up, gathered my papers, and said the only line I had rehearsed. "This family is over, but my life isn't." And with that I walked out, leaving them in the ruins of their own betrayal, a parody of Lovers Exposed, a tragic comedy written by their own hands. If you've ever watched one of those disaster movies where the camera pans across the smoking ruins of a city, cars flipped, buildings half collapsed, birds circling in awkward silence, then you've already seen what my living room looked like the morning after. Not literally, of course. The candles had burned out, the wine glasses were still on the table, but in spirit it was the smoking crater left behind after betrayal detonates. My wife sat there with her head in her hands, looking like a reality TV contestant who'd just been voted off the island. Mascara frozen in streaks, the word mercy still trembling on her lips. My boss had slinked away before dawn, tail tucked, his empire of office pep talks and fake charisma already dissolving into whispers that would echo through the break room forever. Infidelity had finally written them into the joke they thought they were telling behind my back. The aftermath wasn't chaos for me, though. For the first time in months, maybe years, I felt calm, almost peaceful. Revenge, it turns out, doesn't roar. It sighs like finally setting down a heavy bag you've been carrying through an airport terminal. I walked out of that house like a man exiting a theater after a long, absurd play, tossing the ticket stub into the trash and muttering, "Well, that was entertaining." And the American dream facade was gone, burned down to the studs. But for once, I wasn't afraid of the ashes. Family is supposed to be sacred, but when family becomes toxic, love wrapped in lies, tearing it down is the only way to breathe again. Word spread faster than wildfire on social media. Betrayal always trends. By the end of the week, HR had called me into the office, not to reprimand me, but to quietly thank me for providing clarity about our beloved boss. Clarity, that's corporate speak for, we can finally get rid of this guy without paying his bonus. He was escorted out of the building with 2 cardboard boxes, the same cologne lingering, but now mixed with the sour stench of humiliation. I half expected someone to play the Curb Your Enthusiasm theme as he walked out. If betrayal was a business expense, he'd just filed for bankruptcy. My wife, or rather my soon-to-be ex-wife, was a different show altogether. She tried everything: long apology texts written like Hallmark cards, voicemails that began with sobbing and ended with promises of, "We can rebuild this family." Even one letter slipped under my door in perfect cursive, like a middle school crush note. Except instead of doodled hearts, it was just the word "sorry" scribbled 50 times. The irony was almost poetic. The woman who thought she could juggle cheating with family stability, now begging for mercy like she hadn't already cashed in her credibility. But mercy isn't a currency you can buy back once betrayal empties the account. The neighbors, of course, had a field day. In the suburbs, gossip is the only true religion, and suddenly I was their prophet. They whispered about toxic love triangles, about how quiet I'd been, about how no one saw it coming. Some of them even treated me like a folk hero, the man who turned infidelity into performance art. I started getting nods at the grocery store, pats on the back from strangers, as if I'd avenged not just myself, but every American who's ever been stabbed in the back at a backyard barbecue. And me? I didn't rebuild. I didn't jump into a rebound relationship or plaster Instagram with new beginnings. I simply walked forward, lighter than before, because revenge isn't about erasing the past. It's about reclaiming your present. I learned that betrayal, as ugly as it is also clarifying. Cheating cuts through illusions. Toxic love burns away the polite lies, and what's left is raw, uncomfortable truth. And in truth, you're free. Sometimes at night I'd lie in my new apartment, no wedding photos on the walls, no ghost of infidelity in the bed beside me. And I'd laugh, actually laugh, at how absurd it all was. My life had turned into a dark comedy about marriage and power, and somehow I'd survived as both the narrator and the survivor. The revenge didn't just end the betrayal, it rewrote me. And maybe that's the strangest gift of all, that the silence I once thought was suffocating turned out to be my sharpest weapon, my secret stage, my way out. So, if you're asking whether it was worth it, staying silent, plotting revenge, letting betrayal ripen until it was ready to eat, I'll tell you this. The moment she begged for mercy, the moment he walked out with cardboard boxes, the moment I finally breathed, without the stench of toxic love in my lungs, that was the moment I knew I'd won. Not just against them, but against the story they tried to write me into. They wanted me to be the broken husband. Instead, I became the man who turned infidelity into legend. And that, my friend, is the only ending that ever mattered.